Welcome to this new edition of the podcast, first of the month for the month of June 2023. So, as usual now for quite a while, the first podcast of the month is kind of a recap podcast where I will talk about the invitees we had on this English version of the podcast, but also the French version of the podcast, which has different invitees. For those of you who speak a little French or want to practice, or maybe you will want to request that I have the same podcast in English, whatever. But I'll talk about that. I will also talk about the 4 playlists from the YouTube channels that are both in French and in English, what was talked about and what was shown. But first I will go through the 3 keywords for the word hunt, the photocollective.net word hunt. So every month since 2005, the system randomly selects 3 words, which can then serve as an inspiration to go hunt photos, create photos that are closely or not even closely related to their meaning. So the 3 words are, the first one is several, the second one is avoid, and the third one is author. The French translations are plusieurs, éviter, auteur. Éviter is the verb non-conjugated. So let's continue. If you have photos with those keywords and you want to share them on the social networks, there's not much to win aside that it's just a good pretext to invite people to go take pictures with you or interact, or for yourself, just for the exercise. But if you post them, you can put hashtag pclltv with, of course, the hashtag with the words. And if you have 1 word in your picture, 2 or 3, that's even greater. It's kind of fun to see. It will be a good way for others to find you and to exchange and see what they did too. So yeah, let's now go to the invitees of the podcast. So this month of May was pretty long. And the way it was organized meant that we had 4 dialogues in English and in French. So 4 invitees. So the first dialogue of the month was Francesco Arese Visconti. He talks about his work where he digs into his own origins and how he sees photography as a tool to be able to do that introspection. He talks also about being a teacher. He worked at the Webster University in Geneva. He's responsible for photography, communication, and also talks about the future of photography, how he sees it. The second podcast was with Rekha Judith Jaksics, who lives in central Switzerland. She's originally a professional musician, discovered photography quite late as an art form, a complex art form, I'll say. And she talks about her work with this really focalizing on self-portraiture and how she can open with oneself, how she opens up with herself and to others thanks to photography. How this dialogue opens up. Really interesting podcast dialogue. Then the week after, we had Evelyn Johnson in Sweden that talked about her intimate relation to photography, something that's been always there since her early childhood, and how she finds it a great place for space for poetry, and how it also enabled links to others where she was able to build friendships and connections. And also, very importantly, also how she looks at work and art and her intimate art, personal projects, how she can combine being, on one side, a professional that makes a living out of it, which doesn't always coincide with the art ideas she wants, and how she's able to reconcile both of those. And the last episode for the month of May was with Nancy Oliveri from New York, who talks about her relationship to photography, how she creates books, how she presents her photos in multiple contests, and how she uses photography to express feelings, share her thoughts on her own psychological meanders, and super interesting dialogue. and how she relates feelings to art. Yeah, that was the last podcast for this month of May in English. As for the French version, I know not many of you speak French. It might be a good way to provoke some interest in the French language. But we started with Nino Voirier, who's a young photographer who actually won the contest, the public vote for next year's free space at the Photo Geneva Festival. He was a popular vote, and so he won the right to exhibit next year in Rio. There's a free space in that festival, and he talks about how he extracts himself from the digital image, how he uses film photography to go beyond, and how he understands reality and how he tries to tell stories from daily artifacts. The week after, we have Jeremy Spirer, who's also in Geneva in Switzerland, who talks about his passion for photography, how he sees it as a tool to memorize time and create emotions, and how he tries to share all of this through images. The week after, we had Olivier Joly, who is really focused on Iceland. So if you like Iceland, a great dialogue. He was a reporter and he became a photo author. How his story in photography began, and how he slowly went towards Iceland and its landscapes and the cultures. How it's a little bit of a promised land for him. That was the third dialogue in French, and the fourth one was with Charles Xelot, who's for many years has been photographing the far north of Russia, both on land and on the sea. And it's a super interesting dialogue where he talks about why he likes the cold, how he got into photography, and yeah, from a travel to Finland when he was young, how he slowly discovered and tried to express those huge plains and those seas of ice through photography, and try to share that to the viewers. Okay, so that was the dialogues for the French and the English and the French channels. As for the YouTube channel, so the YouTube channel, for those who don't know, there's basically 4 playlists. There's the dialogues we have on this podcast, which are filmed in a Zoom style, so you can see the expressions on our faces when we have those dialogues. But otherwise, we started the months with AIs Hit. AIs Hit is my try to understand an artificial intelligence and how far it is to understanding how to imitate and be inspired by famous photographers. So every week I try to go through another photographer. And ChatGPT helps me with the data, which can be terribly wrong, but sometimes you have some good data. And I use Dall-E and Midjourney to illustrate ChatGPT's words. So this first week was Dorothea Lange, that kind of tried to show an empathic view on the America of the Depression. So yeah, how does AI see it? Lots of illustrations, every week. The week after, that was Sal Leiter. How does AI see those colors, the reflections, the multitude of layers in his work, and how does it evoke city sensations? I kind of liked that episode, so I really urge you to go see it. And the week after that was Annie Leibovitz. How does AI see those portraits of celebrities, the glamour, the fashion, and the rock and roll? Yeah, that was the third one. And because of this weird month, we still have Norman Parkinson. We have a fourth one. How does AI see fashion, the glamour, the exotic places he used to take pictures, and how the mise en scène and the party feeling came out. These were the 4 AIs Hit for this month of May. The first Monday of the month, we had Serial, and that was Serial is this playlist where I talk about the photos I took or the photos I've edited during the previous months. And that's the occasion to talk about the equipment I practice with, or I'm trying to discover, or that I'm simply using in order to make a review for the voncam playlist. I'll be talking about that after. So it's a good way to see what kind of cameras I've used, what kind of photos, what projects I'm on. It goes from digital to film, and lots of equipment comes through. But it's focalized on what I did. So that serial for the month of May was the Leica M8, the Leica Hector 28 millimeter lens, also the TT Artisan tilt shift 50 millimeter. The first results I had. Also working with some 35 millimeter film expired and new 120 format film, expired APS films. The Voigtlander Vito C point and shoot camera, that's also film, and lots of digicams. So an interesting month, I think, quite eclectic, but interesting if you like cameras and films. Then the next Monday we had a voncam. Voncam, that's when I talk about cameras, and that first episode for the month of May was a comparison between the Leica M2 and the M3. Which one would you choose, and what are the differences? Is one really for wide angle and the other one more for tele? What are the differences between the two classics? And I did a short review, just comparing both. And did we have a second voncam? We had a second voncam, and the second one was the Rolei XF35, which is a point and shoot, tiny rangefinder with a great lens. It's a 40 millimeter Sonar f2.3. So some results are displayed both with black and white film and color film, and I talk about how the experience using this camera. So that was a fun one, at least for me. So hopefully that will be entertaining for you too. Yeah, and that's about it for this month and this first part of the podcast. It's the first time I'm doing the second part of the podcast. It's new, so for quite a while I've been talking about that a little bit, but I'm trying to find ways for this podcast to make me happy. So make me happy in a podcast way. If I don't find interesting doing the podcast for the pleasure of doing it, makes no real sense. And I wanted to have more interaction with some kind of a question that sometimes people ask me, and also some questions that I ask myself. And while I can maybe answer a few technical things, I'm really definitely not the expert on most things. So I might give my own opinion, but beyond that, I'd like to create something here where I might be able to relay some of your questions, maybe partially answer it in my own way, or create some debates. And some of those debates maybe we could have on this second part of the podcast, which will be every week after the dialogues, such as people that don't care about the experimental thing of the podcast don't need to stay tuned. But also it's an interesting way by having that in the second part to have some kind of variable geometry. So yeah, for this first episode, I don't have much more else to propose, except that I thought it could be a good idea to actually create. Many people have asked me about projects. I'm really, for those who know my work, I'm more into photographic matter, mainly digital, not also film, of course, but I do software. But what I like most is experimental narration, trying to tell stories that are not always explicit. How do I construct them? And I get lots of questions about that. So I thought maybe something interesting would be to actually create a whole work from scratch for the podcast. So not this episode, but next episode, I'm going to try to find an idea that will lead me to something else, maybe a book, maybe a publication. I don't know, the Aporama or some exhibition. We'll see. And every week you will be able to interact maybe with me mainly through Instagram, because all those platforms for podcasts makes it a little bit complicated to stay in touch. For now, I might organize that better in the future, but don't hesitate. And otherwise, it's going to be, the second part is going to be always a little bit more variable. I had this weird interaction online with the foam, the Photo Amsterdam. It's a museum. They have a publication. They have a whole infrastructure and a whole network. They're really incredible in terms of photography, and they have an open call for new talents. And that one was relayed to me by a friend, and I couldn't resist reacting on the Instagram feed and saying, because they have actually an age limit. They don't tell you about that until you try to register. And while I don't really want to participate, I found it really interesting to see that it was basically, if you're beyond 40 years old or something like that, it doesn't really matter, but beyond a certain age, which is kind of mid to not yet old, but well, anyways, you're not allowed to participate in this talent call. And it's not really stated before, because it's an open call for new talents. And so I asked, why do you put this limit? Because, maybe somebody who's been working on something else the rest of his life discovers suddenly photography. He's 65, or I don't know, some kind of grandma or grandpa with suddenly this urge to experiment things with a camera, suddenly become a real talent. Why this criteria? And the only answer they had was, you can send us work differently if you want to be published. But I'm more interested in discovering those new talents. And I think an organism like the foam can really highlight them, spotlight them. And that was not a good answer for me. But anyways, they're free to do whatever they want. But the same thing for somebody who's a kid. Maybe they have some legal reasons for for younger than 16, but maybe there's a really incredible new talent coming up. But as for the younger ones, maybe they feel that the maturity is not there, the life experience. But for older photographers, just looks like they're only interested in marketable, people who can have many years of career after, sort of, that they would be able to bank on. I don't know. But that would be interesting to have someone from the foam to discuss it. But that was something I found interesting. Maybe you have your own opinion. I think it's kind of stupid, in my opinion, because if I want to discover older photographers that are incredible, I think they should be stimulated too, and the foam would be great. Anyways, please send me back your own opinions, and if you have other ideas, don't hesitate again. And that was the first try for this second part of the podcast. So see you next time.